Hi there, my name is Ludwig Chincarini. I've decided to go down to San Diego and interview the father of modern portfolio theory, Harry Markowitz. By the way, a lot of people don't know this, but when Harry submitted his PhD thesis, which changed portfolio management forever, he almost didn't get through. And the story goes something like this. His dissertation committee consisted of Milton Friedman, Marshak, among others. Harry Markowitz was pretty confident that he knew more about portfolio theory than anyone else, so he thought it'd be a breeze. So he goes into the committee room, and Milton Friedman starts out with, "You know, I've checked through your thesis, and I don't find any errors. However, we've got a big problem. I don't think it's economics. In fact, I don't think it's finance. I don't think it's mathematics." And then Marshak chimed in, "It's certainly not literature." So they paused for a moment and looked at him and said, "Could you please wait outside? We're going to have to make a difficult decision." So Harry Markowitz went outside. At this point, he did get a little nervous. They called him in about 5 minutes later and said, "Congratulations, Dr. Markowitz." Well, that event always bothered Harry a little bit. And it was many years later that he was at a conference where Milton Friedman also attended. And he went up to Milton Friedman and said, "Were you really serious when I defended my PhD thesis that you might have failed me?" And Milton Friedman looked at him and said, "Harry, you know back in those days we never failed anyone that young. It was just my last chance to make a graduate student feel miserable. So thank you." Anyway, Harry made it over that, and modern portfolio theory was changed forever. With mean variance optimization, efficient frontiers, diversification, eventually came the capital asset pricing model, and the whole world of investing changed. Well, I'm going today to interview Harry Markowitz. Some of the topics we're going to talk about is how did mean variance change in all these years? What are some of the problems with mean variance? Then we're going to also get to topics like income inequality and how it was to win the Nobel Prize, and even some social issues like his thoughts about political correctness. It's going to be a really fun ride. In the middle of this interview, I'm going to take some time to show you his library and some of the exciting books in the library, including the original notes to the famous 1959 book, Portfolio Theory. That's right, the original notes will be in this video. I hope you join me to have some fun in San Diego. Thank you, Dr. Markowitz. And
my pleasure.
Can I call you Harry?
You please do.
And thank you for doing this. And
My pleasure.
I know you've done a lot, but you know this hopefully is a little different, a little fun. And,
Okay.
And thank you for inviting us to your office. And
I hope it's both fun and serious.
it's very
because,
serious.
Fun is something that you do on as a sideline on your own time. Serious is what we get paid for and what we want to propagate.
So speaking of that, can I mention some of these beautiful
Sure.
books here? So this is a portfolio selection book, Harry Markowitz. It's not an original.
Right, that's right.
But it's a nice, and then this is an original of David Hume.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So this one was given, this leather-bound portfolio selection was given to me by the Berkeley Symposium. Haynes Leland headed it. I gave a talk there I think it was the 50th anniversary of Markowitz 1959, and they gave me a Markowitz, a leather-bound
That's
Markowitz
very nice.
1959.
Did you like the book?
it was good to make a living from. Anyway, I'll try not to go into Yiddish accents too much. Anyway.
Okay, so mean variance clearly has had an enormous impact on practitioners and academics everywhere, there's no doubt. But one criticism that some people have had over even as far back as 15, 20 years is that if the inputs are not correct, in other words, if you're measuring historical data and the historical data doesn't repeat, then you get portfolios that aren't really the ones you want. And so my question is, how would you say people deal with that issue?
Sure. Hang on a second. The first law of any, it is well known that the first law of any computer application is garbage in, garbage out. Now, so if it is true that if you use historical data, and don't do anything about it, you are going to get crazy portfolios. And somehow a lot of people use it. Let's ask how many people use it. There was a survey done by, well, it was actually two surveys, sorry, before 2008, there was a survey done by the Bank of New York, and after 2008, there was a survey done by the Bank of New York Mellon. And they asked, and I was on the committee that designed the survey, and I also did a forward to the document that they put out. And one of the questions they asked was, do you use, and it didn't say portfolio theory, but computerized or mathematical, something essentially portfolio theory, MPT. Do you use it for asset allocation, attribution analysis, and so on? And approximately maybe 75% used it. Oh, and the question was, do you use it regularly, occasionally, or never? So 75% said regularly, routinely. Another 10% or so said on occasions, and it was like 15% said they never used it. Now, at that time, worldwide, institutional investors controlled $100 trillion, not billion, 100 trillion. That was before BlackRock got to be 6 trillion all by itself, and so on. So there are, the better part of hundreds of trillions of dollars used this way, and the system hasn't imploded. So the question is, how do you use it? Hang on a second. One thing that's important to remember is that the world is different now than it was in 1959, 1952. There's a story going around that says in 1952, when I was offered, TIA, stocks versus bond, TIA versus CREF, TIA, something like that, I did the 50-50 mix, okay? And then it said, I've even read in the Wall Street Journal, see, Harry Markowitz doesn't use portfolio theory. Well, there's a difference between 1952 and now. There were no databases. There was no algorithm. There was no experience. There was no Ibbotson. Nobody knew that if you put $1 in 1926 and you waited to now, that it would be worth $10,000, $12,000. If it's small cap, $5,000. If it was large cap, and $130. If it was treasuries, or thereabouts. You have to look at this chart. So now I would recommend to a person my age to, with a good income and so on, to essentially go all equity and so on. So the world is different.
So your age, meaning your actual age, 90 years old, then when you were at that age?
Yeah, I was 25 years old.
Okay.
You know, a 25-year-old with a good job and enough money for you know, liquidity back in the bank should go all equity.
All equity.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure, or 90% or something like that. Okay.
Just to add on, so
Sure.
you know there's a lot of robo-advisors that are out there.
Right, sure.
And by the way, I'm starting one. We'll talk about that later.
Right,
I'll be
right,
off
right.
the camera.
I consult for two of them. So why has why has MVA, mean variance analysis, lasted so long and been so intrinsic to modern finance? And by the way, I would like to spend some time telling you about things I've done since
Yeah,
59.
we're doing that. We'll do that.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
we'll do that.
Okay. Mean variance analysis has provided a framework. You are not supposed to use, I never said you were supposed to use historical. In fact, if you look at the first paragraph of the first thing I published, Markowitz 1952, it says there are two steps in the selection of portfolios. There should be two steps, or is two steps. One is to use security analysts to make forward-looking estimates. And this theme is repeated in my 1959 book with an example. And secondly, then portfolio analysis can go from estimates provided by security analysts to estimates provided by security analysts to portfolio selection. Now, I thought that, hang on a second, mean variance analysis has become a framework. Let me make that clear. It is not a prescription that says do this, this, and this, and this.
Right.
Every application of it, mean variance analysis, has to make certain decisions. It has to decide what is the universe of investing. Is it individual securities? Is it asset classes? What is it? If you have a oh, I'm sorry. Mark? Mark?
In the bathroom.
I'll get it. Well,
Yeah. Oh, I had it. I want him to open the door. It's getting hot in here.
We
Just-
just put the air on.
No, I don't want the air. I just want the door open.
We put it on anyway.
What temperature? We'll
It
freeze.
was at 73.
I'll just open the
Can I-
door. Lily.
Just open the doors. I don't want the noise of I don't want the sound of the air conditioning. I don't want the air conditioning blowing on me. Just I wanted the door open. The door's open.
Everything off.
Harry, can I summarize? I think I've
No.
understood.
No,
No? Okay.
you haven't heard it. You
But
haven't
I
listened.
think I've understood it.
Tell me
already.
about it.
So what I think you're saying, and if I'm wrong...
No, because I haven't gotten to,
Okay. It's fair enough.
because I haven't said it yet.
Okay.
Okay. Every application of mean variance analysis has some decisions it must make. One is what should be the granularity of the analysis? Is it every minute, every week, annually? Okay, that is a basic decision. Microsecond by microsecond or annual rebalancing, that is a basic decision, granularity. Secondly, you have to make a decision as to what is the investable list, what is the universe of investable. Is it asset classes or individual securities? And the decision has to do with your knowledge. If you are Warren Buffett, you have information which you and I don't have, and you have analysis capabilities that you and I don't have, and you can do one kind of universe. The most commonly used, in terms of how many $1 trillion are used, is this top-down analysis, which is now commonly used, where you do your analysis at asset class level, and you have to decide what are your asset classes and so on. So step one, you have to decide your granularity. Step two, you have to decide what your universe is. Step three, you have to have some kind of a process which supplies expected returns and variances and covariances, or a process which produces a model of covariance. This is the framework. People work in this framework with hundreds of trillions of dollars. That's it.
Okay, I understand it. I
Okay.
understand it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was doing something with mean variance,
Yep.
and And what I noticed is that mean variance, a different application, not the traditional,
Sure, that's fine.
didn't really give me what I wanted. And
Sure.
let me explain why. I'll give you the analogy.
Sure.
If someone gives me the 500 stocks of the S&P 500 for the last 30 years
Sure.
and tells me, find out what the optimal weighting scheme is. In other
Sure.
words, if I use mean variance, it will not give me that. It will give me an average weight over that period
Sure.
that is pretty good, but it never will figure out what the S&P really is, market
Sure.
cap weighted. So my question to you is, have you or has anyone figured out techniques to solve that problem, which can be useful sometimes?
Sure.
Sometimes you want to know the dynamic as the weights change dynamically,
Right.
and so that's my question. Is there anyone who's worked on that?
The specific answer to the specific question, has anybody worked on a problem which you've just told me about, is of course no. I don't know if anybody's worked on it. I haven't done a literature search. The answer, but the more general answer to what you're talking about is, first, I am not professionally, primarily in finance. That is not what I trained for. My training is in operations research. I actually got a degree in economics, but I learned linear programming. I developed quadratic programming. I do utility analysis because so when you have an operations research problem, you start with a blank sheet, and you say, what kind of technique will solve that problem? Historically, I showed you before a list of 14 areas where I made major contributions, not including some of the computational stuff I did like sparse matrices, but you always start with saying, what is the problem? Is it something which can be solved with linear programming, quadratic programming, simulation? I devised a simulation language because there are certain problems where you need to simulate, and at the time when I first got introduced to simulation, in fact, when I supervised the programmers in a large man-machine simulation done at the Rand Corporation, I could see the value of simulation, but I used to say it takes longer to build a simulation of the factory before you build than it took to build a factory. So I've developed. I was showing you before that Laurie Ward collected a display of 14 things I did. So, step one, what is the problem? Step two, how do we solve the problem? If it's not by MPT, then what's it by? But your problem hadn't to do with MPT. It was how to go from the data you had to the problem you wanted to solve. And your conclusion was, this data analyzed that way doesn't work. So the next problem you should have asked yourself is, if I use this same data but differently, will it do better? If I use different data, will it do better, or is it an unsolvable problem?
And that's what I'm working on, so thank you. I'm
You're
trying
welcome.
to. I don't know if they'll...
Well, you've got to start from square one and ask what's the problem and what kind of technique can I bring to bear.
Can I send it to you if...
No.
No.
I am very busy.
Not to solve it, but... you're too busy, yeah.
No.
If I have an attempt at it.
Yeah. I'd rather discuss than read because you can't interact with. But I would be delighted to have you. I'm sorry, leave the door open. I would be delighted to have you send me a piece of paper, like a document I can read, and then
And
and then I'll give you a call and say, why aren't you doing this?
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
So you mentioned Warren Buffett, and so here's my question to you on, nowadays everyone has I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people have large portfolios, the whole industry does.
Sure.
But people like Warren Buffett and even John Keynes, right, believed you can just have a few really good stocks and you'll do really well. And so I'd like to know your opinion on that. What's your view on that? Because even I debate myself, am I doing the right thing?
The right thing has to do with what kind of information you have. Somebody famous said, put all your eggs in one basket and watch the basket. Now, if you are starting up an enterprise like Microsoft or something, you will not only not diversify, you will not try to start Microsoft and Google at the same time, but you'll probably borrow from your family and put all your effort into that. And if you win big, and if you lose, well, you owe money to your family. So it depends, what is the problem? What is your knowledge? What is the opportunity set? Again, you go back to square one. Now, if you have, I once ran I once was an ARB, a convertible ARB. I ran I ran something called Arbitrage Management Company. Mike Goodkin, who's the entrepreneur, has a book out on
What year was this? What year, roughly?
1968 to 72,
Okay.
69. It was at a time when you could make money from convertible arbitrage because not everybody was in the field. And we needed to identify convertible arbitrage, situations. We found that unlike Black-Scholes, which came out almost when my 3 years were up and I moved on to something else, we found that instead of the relationship between the price of the stock and the price of the convertible bond and the underlying price of the stock did not have some kind of curve that you would imagine from Black-Scholes, because as the stock price goes, as the bond price, there's a correlation between the price of the stock and the quality of the bond, the rating of the bond. Mm-hmm. So it's quite linear, but it traded in a band. So the pair of prices was sometimes high in the band and sometimes low in the band. Stock was on the x-axis, bond was on the y-axis. So sometimes the convertible was trading high in the band, sometimes low in the band, and we had to we had to buy when it was low in the band and get rid of it when it wasn't too high but above the middle of the band. We were looking for situations where it would go back and forth with sufficient speed to justify, after commissions, the such that your return per dollar invested per unit time was worth the capital. I decided at that time 20 situations would be sufficient, 20. And if you look at the relationship between mean, if you talk about idiosyncratic risk, now we had systematic risk was just the bond market, not the stock market, but the bond market. So if the bond market went down, we were long the bonds and short the stock, and that would go down. And that happened once in my tenure. Okay, so if you look at the relationship between, let's say, standard deviation, as in my book, in chapter 5 of my 1959 book, you'll see that you get quite a bit of diversification from 20 stocks. So why do people go out to 100? Well, Bill Sharp says, well, in the process of going from 20 stocks to 100 stocks, if they're really diversified, if different industries and so on, you get some more diminishing of the variance and so on.
Okay.
So 20 is stock.
20 is fine.
But in some situation, 100 is right.
Okay, so
one more thing.
Yeah.
Liquidity. I mean, historically, equal weighting does better than cap weighting. But if you are CalPERS, you cannot equal weight.
Right.
And so on. Okay.
So this question has to do with, this is an odd one, but it's about,
Good, I like that
there's
question.
been some articles on, including my own, but there's been articles about how the changing distribution of the population could lead to crowding in the equity market, meaning at times you have a lot of people invested and other times less, especially with population growth rates changing. And I wanted to know if I think we don't do enough in finance or economics about changing demographics and what it might affect returns. Maybe that's not true, but what do you think about that?
Well, first, who are we? There are people who look at demographics. I've attended meetings, Rob Arnott's meeting that he has annually. I remember in fact, I remember Rob specifically talking about demographics. So there are some people who look at demographics. Secondly, you have to give, as I come back to over and over and over again, you are supposed to be making forward-looking estimates given your information. If you are optimistic about, well, for example, if you're pessimistic about certain sectors, or you know that interest rates are not, you're not going to get the same thing on a T-bill now as you got over the average, you have to reflect that in your forward-looking estimates. Now, how you should translate demographic, I mean, the fact that it has been well known in certain circumstances, I'm sorry, everybody knew about the post-war baby boom. Everybody knew when the baby boomers would retire. Some people reflected that in their forward-looking estimates of means variances and covariances. Some people did not. Anybody who thinks that mean variance analysis should be applied mechanically using historical estimates is just plain ignorant of what mean variance analysis is supposed to do.
Okay. Can we do a few lighter questions?
Sure.
And then we'll get back to
No, we've done enough heavy.
Okay. So this is really simple. You won the Nobel Prize, and
Nothing is simple.
you for mean and variance that we've been talking about for a while. Yet you were an economics student, and aren't economists supposed to just do inflation and monetary policy? So what gave you the idea? And I know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear it. What gave you the idea to think about a portfolio of risky assets?
Sure. There's a little story, but let me say generically, you can do two different things. You can do you can do whatever everybody else is doing, which assures you that you will get published in one of the hundreds of journals which publish what everybody else is doing, or you could go your own path. And sometimes it takes a decade or two before anybody's following you.
Is that the case? Was that your case?
I published Markowitz 1952 in 1952. Nobody really paid any attention until Sharp 1963 and 1964. If you look at the literature before Sharp, 1963 was a simplified model of covariance, just using the one-factor model. And 1964, I advised Sharp on the 1963 as part of his dissertation. 1964 was CAP-M, that's all his doing. So there was 11 years, if I count correct, between 1952 and 1963, and nothing much was happening. A few people were noticing it, and then it started to take off. The academics came in 60s, and the actual money came in 70s.
Interesting.
Right now, I have work that I've done from 59 to 2018, which I believe to be as transformal as which I presented at your seminar, and I think it's as transformal as 1952 work became. But I don't have time to wait 11 years for anybody to pay attention to it.
What about how it came about? Like you told me the story.
Oh, sure. I worked at the Coles. I was working at. I was a student at economics at the University of Chicago. When you got out of the elevator at the university, excuse me a second. Sorry, let me start at the beginning. I was a student of economics at the University of Chicago. As you got out of the elevator, on the whatever floor, fourth floor, let's say, of the social science building, was the economics department, and on your right, appropriately, was Milton Friedman and his crowd, and on your left was the Coles Commission, which is econometrics and so on. So I was working for the Coles Commission. Charlie Koopmans, who later got a Nobel Prize for his work on activity analysis, I was in his class, and he said, "Come join the Coles Commission," and I was, I had got to the point where I had to choose a dissertation topic, and I went to Professor Marshak, my advisor, formerly head of Coles, And he was busy, and there was another, so I waited in an anteroom. There was another guy out there, and we discussed why I was here and why. He was a broker, and he suggested that I apply my techniques to, econometric techniques to the stock market. And when I got into Marshak's office, I said, the guy out there thinks I should apply it to the stock market. He said Alfred Coles would like that. Alfred Coles endowed the Coles Commission. He actually did Coles Commission Monograph 3, which Alfred Coles himself was the first one to try to see how well market forecasted predicted,
Right.
and he found that they don't do very well.
This was this 1933 or something.
Right, I can't remember, but there was he did it
He was one of the
early.
first,
He was one of the first, and he also started.
Did you ever meet him, or was he
Once.
too? Okay.
Later, Coles moved to went from Coles Commission to Coles Foundation.
Okay.
They moved to under Tobin. They moved to
Yale. Right.
To Yale. Alfred Coles is, I think, is an old Yaley, but there's the Whiff and Poof song. Goes Yale at a table down at Maury's, where the place we live. Well, we had a table down at Maury's. I made up for dinner at a table down at Maury's, and wonderful. It was. I remember these tables had carvings in it from who knows 1900. I mean, from anyway. So yes, I met him once.
And so, but when you so the broker gave you this idea, apply it, but
Right,
you
okay.
still had to think.
I mean, there's a continuity to this story,
Sorry?
which was fine. I remember I can supply the continuity, so that when it turns out to light stuff, you can interrupt as often as you want.
Okay.
When it comes to serious stuff, that needs a certain continuity to understand. So Marshak thought it was a good idea, and but he didn't know the literature, so he sent me over to Professor Ketchum, who I didn't know at that time, but he was the dean of the business school. He gave me a reading list, and the reading list included Graham and Dodd, of course, and Wiesenberger, not somebody in Wiesenberg, but Wiesenberg investment companies and their portfolios. I could see how they were, and then John Burr Williams' theory of investment value. And Williams said that the value of a stock is the present value of its future dividends. So I knew dividends were uncertain, so I said he must mean expected value. And later in the book, he says when things are uncertain, you should use the mean value. And if you diversify enough, you will make variance, the volatility go away, and you will get the mean. Well, that is true if things are uncorrelated. But how anybody having lived through 1929 to 33, I think he published in 37 or thereabouts, can think that returns are uncorrelated are beyond me. He just didn't know. So I decided then that returns, stock market returns, I'll assume is like random variables. A portfolio is a weighted sum of these random variables. I knew what the expected value was of a weighted sum, but I didn't know what the variance or standard deviation of the weighted sum was. So I got out from the library shelf a book, Introduction to Mathematical Probability by Uspensky, a client.
It's this book.
No, not that specific one. This is a lot. You knew
Okay,
it. This was supplied by one of my clients. I think I don't remember who. But one of my clients gave me that. I looked for the formula for the variance, standard deviation, but variance, let's say, and it had covariances, and that was my aha moment. That was my first aha moment. The volatility of a stock depends not only on the volatility of its constituents and how much you weight them and how you weight them together, but to what extent they go up and down together, and that's the beginning of portfolio theory.
That's great. That's great.
Win a few, lose a few.
It was a good one.
Yeah, thank you.
So
But let me point out,
Yeah.
it's happened again and again. It is well known among behavioral economists that I'm the grandfather of behavioral finance. In fact, if you look at Kahneman's account of how prospect theory came into being. He tells you that they had some experimental data they couldn't. That he and Amos Tversky had some experimental data they couldn't explain, and then finally Tversky comes in all smiles. I found the answer in a then 25-year-old paper, which I refer to as Markowitz 1952b, called The Utility of Wealth. And what it says, if you want to explain real behavior, don't ascribe utility to wealth, ascribe it to change in wealth, and I had a utility function, and that plus their knowledge of psychology became behavioral finance. So I'm the grandfather.
Behavioral.
Yeah.
And we have some more coming on behavioral.
Okay, good.
So one question about mean variance. So clearly you formalized it. Did you get any hint at the time that maybe some professionals were already using the idea, but they just hadn't put it in? So this is, the idea that, maybe they were using it, but no one had written about it.
If you say, who thought of diversification? Well, the Bible, Shakespeare, Antonio, and Merchant of Venice. Antonio, why are you depressed? Are your business going bad? No, my wealth is not to one bottom trusted, nor my fortune to this year. And so he knew about time diversification and thing diversification. So what was lacking? I mean, John Burr Williams thought if you diversified enough, you could make variance go away, which is not correct. Mm-hmm. The notion of being mean variance efficient given correlated risks and choosing subject to non-negativity constraints and so on, that happened that fateful day, some afternoon in 1950 at the business school library.
Excellent. Okay. Who is, these are still some light questions, but how did your life change after winning the Nobel Prize? And what's the best thing or the most exciting thing that happened and you think it's because of that?
The most exciting thing is clearly by far not due to portfolio theory, it's due to the SimScript programming language, which is another thing I do. Remember I said you start from a clean scratch, and if you need simulation, you do simulation, and I have a programming language that will help. My wife, Barbara Markowitz, programmed her dissertation in my programming language. This was between the second and third marriage. Third was her, and we've been working at it, and she was married twice before, but we've been working at it for 48 years. I think it's going to stick.
Wow.
At a memorial for Jack Traynor, there was a round table on Sunday, but I was going to give an hour presentation on Monday, so I didn't want to repeat well. So I told them about the one thing that's common between Jack's wife, Betsy, and my wife, Barbara. They always showed up at the technical meetings, and Betsy sort of was Jack Traynor's caregivers. He was very somehow eccentric and brilliant, and my wife was a technical person. I said she programmed her, in my programming language, and I said to the crowd, I wonder if she had a deliberate thought that the shortest distance to a man's heart is through his programming language. And I said it in jest. And then Barbara now needs a caregiver because she has chronic fatigue syndrome, and then she had a stroke recently. But I said to her, I related this story to the caregiver. Barbara can't verbalize because the stroke. And then I asked Barbara, did you consciously think the closest way to the man's heart is through his programming language? And she smiled like the cat that swallowed the canary. So I'm a victim of a superior intellect. And she had to design what Grandpa Harry. So that is obviously the best thing that ever happened to me.
Okay, excellent. So we talked about Bill Sharp, co-inventor of the CAPM. And how did you meet Bill? And what great lessons did you pass on to Bill?
Yes. Bill, I was working at the Rand Corporation, probably on SimScript or whatever. And Bill presented himself at my door and said, my name is Bill Sharp. I work at the Rand Corporation. I also try to get a PhD at UCLA. Mm-hmm. My Professor Fred Weston, who was the editor at the Journal of Finance when I published Markowitz 1952, said to Bill said, Fred Weston said, why don't you come and you liked the 1952 article, why don't you go ask Bill Sharp for a topic? So I had, it was 1960, that was as best we can think, so the Markowitz 1959 obvious was out. One of the things you'll find in, one of the things you'll find in Markowitz 1959, chapter 5 is, chapter 4, beg your pardon, the last sort of from page 96 to 100, more or less, is the topic of derived covariances. There are too many covariances. If you are doing forward-looking estimates carefully, as I indicate, well, if you had 100 securities, you would have 100 expected returns and 100 standard deviation, but you'd have 100 times 101 divided by 2, which is a big number, covariances, and you cannot, carefully considered. So you have to have some kind of model of covariance, we'd call, or derived covariance. So I presented to Bill the problem of, too many covariances. The single factor model is in the book, and in fact, how you get the expected returns and variances, how you get variances and covariance from a one factor model is in a footnote in Markowitz 1959. But I never did any experimentation to see how good it was as compared to full covariance and so on. And that became Bill Sharp's 1963 simplified model of covariance. One factor model at that time seemed good enough. Later it turned out that we need a multi-factor model, but it's another story. CAP-M, Sharp's 1964 is all of his business.
And when you thought of that in your book, right?
Sure.
And how do I ask this question? Computers were pretty slow, so doing any of these testing was difficult. How did you even think? What made you know that was going to be a problem?
Well, because computers were slow, much slower than now, I knew that you had to, in order to do a mean variance analysis, at any reasonable number of securities, you could not work with a full covariance matrix. And the notion that you'd have a factor model just happened. It just seemed like, how do you, if you are given a covariance matrix, how do you make a simpler model? If you're giving data, how do you make a simpler model? Well, you do a regression of return on stuff. Everybody knows that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, well, now today everyone knows.
No. Statistical analysis.
Yeah. So you applied it and...
I had a course in statistics. It said, y goes up and down with x plus an idiosyncratic, or it goes up and down with x1, x2, x3. Where should you start? At the simplest model. If it works, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay. What is something that you learned from a family member that helped you in your career? Or your life?
Well, first there's mother and father, and I learned morality. That's important. Secondly, my uncle my uncle became a famous astronomer. Everybody in our family, we're Jews. We don't work for anybody. We work for ourselves. Everybody in my family was either a professor or a shopkeeper. My dad was a shopkeeper. His father was a My dad had a grocery store, and then he moved to a card store because it got too hard to work on a grocery. Take 100-pound sacks of potatoes and dump them into a bin, or 50-pound, whatever the big sacks were. So he made a lot of money. His father was in the wholesale business and so on. But his brother was a famous astronomer. If you look in the Encyclopedia Britannica, he was the head of the time service at the Naval Observatory, and time is very important. If you look at in the Encyclopedia Britannica under time measurement, then it's done by one W.M. William Markowitz. That's Uncle Willie.
Wow.
So, I mean, there was a expectation which my mother passed on to me and my father exemplified.
Okay. So it's good examples around you, really.
Yeah, I have a warm and loving family. I used to be upset because Dad would yell at Mother like Archie Bunker. But when Mother died in her sleep after they had a walk, Dad was absolutely distraught. So he loved, and she must have known. Let him yell.
Do you have any regrets?
None.
Here's a question
That's not quite true.
Yeah.
There are remarks which were not kind I made when I was young, or things I did, of no great, they're perfectly legal and they were perfectly stupid. And once in a while in reflecting on how good God has been to me, or how lucky I have been, as the case may be, I sometimes wish I had not done some stupid things in my life.
Would you say these were personal or professional? Colleagues?
Professional. No,
Okay.
colleagues. No. By the time I had colleagues, I had grown up. I had learned a certain amount of tact. I'm very candid.
Yeah.
But if I say something which is politically incorrect, for example, I know I'm saying something that is politically incorrect. Except, if I sometimes hear that I've said something politically incorrect, which disturbs me greatly, that I didn't know I was saying something politically incorrect, because if you could go out of your way, despite your personality, to say something politically correct, you should at least enjoy it.
Right.
And there used to be some stuffed shirts. Well, they're holier than thou people. And I am more politically correct than you are. I am more non-sexist than you are. It's a class of things. I am more American than you are. I am whiter than you are. I am Aryan and you are not.
Right.
I am better than you because, now I can play, somebody, Itzhak Perlman can say, I play the violin better than you do. Well, good, but that doesn't make you a better, I've created more theorems than you do, but who you are and whether you're good or not depends on your willingness to see other people happy. It has to do with your relationship with the world.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you said some things in the past, and today we're in an environment where, this is a side thing, but I'm curious, where it seems like you can't say what you want to say anymore, and I think is that a bad thing?
That is evil. In the struggle between good and evil, there's always a struggle between what set of principles will be the moral philosophy of a institution, of a society. Now, I was saying my moral philosophy is better than the politically correct moral philosophy, so I have to defend that. But the politically correct folks these days, if they hear something which sounds, no matter what is said, no matter the content, they'll say that could be politically incorrect. And so it's I am better than you are because I know political correctness. And if you go back over, as I say, the history of holier than thou-ness, the Inquisition had to do with holier than thou-ness, and so Hitler had to do with I am better than you are because McCarthyism was I am better than you. So a society does have to have principles, it does have to defend itself, but think of the injustice. There's this business of when I dated him, he did something I did not like. Mm-hmm. He didn't rape me, but he did not do something he did not like. Now suppose somebody just rumor, he did something that was wrong sexually, okay, Now, as that spreads, somebody has said, I wish I knew that a lie can go around the world before truth can get its pants on. How does this happen? Well, if I say somebody, let's take these sexual, things. If I say, if some woman says, and again, I am not being politically incorrect by speaking of women because, again, I spoke of, you have to be so careful that you cannot speak. If you have to filter, if you're kind-hearted and don't say anything derogatory, you should not have to filter whether the words you are using could possibly be misinterpreted. Okay, so if A tells somebody B, somebody did something that I didn't like sexually, and you tell A tells B in confidence, well, you know what about confidence? Then she tells two other people in confidence, who each tells two other people in confidence, and 2 to the 30 is huge. 30, pretty soon the whole world, if they were listening, know it. And you know how stories change. I mean, pretty soon, instead of being, he did something that I didn't like, he raped me. And you can't catch up on that by saying, I did not rape that woman.
It's too late.
It's too late. Okay.
How has aging affected you, and what advice would you give to others about the aging process?
Well, first place, how to get to be 90 years old. My wife, when I had, you'll notice I keep coming back to Barbara. She's a partner. She was a partner. Right now, she can't verbalize because she had a stroke, which paralyzed her right side, and so how do we communicate? We can't talk. Well, for 45 minutes, approximately, 45 minutes plus or minus, after dinner, we hold hands. And I mostly hold her left hand, which is functional, and she's very lively and playful. And sometimes I unfold her right hand, which is folded up and cold, and hold it until it warms. So we are still partners, and we work together. And so she had a career. I met her at the Rand Corporation, and when we married, she retired, and she said, Harry is a full-time job. Now that doesn't mean that she took care of herself. She made sure that her grandchildren, her grandchildren, I remember her sitting on the floor wrapping gingerbread houses for the fathers to put together, and she said, oh, I am so tired, I will never do this again. And of course, by Christmas time, she was doing it again. So she had a concept of the family. I would go to, I told you about, she decided I was going to be Grandpa Harry, and she trapped me, but I have no complaints. I remember if I were finishing breakfast, we traveled a lot together, and if I were finishing breakfast and there was a bill to pay, a check, I said, why don't you use your credit card? She says, that's your job. So I was the head of the family, but she wrote my job description. Anyway, what was your original question?
Well, I think you've sort of answered love as part of it, but what is the aging and how have you lived so long?
I got high blood pressure, and high cholesterol, and my physician put me on blood pressure pills and cholesterol pills, and she said, well, I think we should be able to reduce your cholesterol by diet. So she went to the new school, we were living back east, took a course on spa cooking, and she learned how they cook for people who have, maladies. She cooked that way. So we have since that point in time, sort of 5 days a week, eaten veggies and a piece of fish, which I usually cook because I'm a better cook than she is. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make me a better person. I'm just a better cook, which he knows, which he knew, which he always knew. I still cook the fish, salmon on Monday and something white on Wednesdays, and on the weekend I have maybe a little piece of steak once in a while.
So you still have some red meat. You still have that.
Well, on occasions.
And when did this start? When did you start this? Around what age? This type of.
I was back east. We got married at when we were roughly 43. About 9 months after we got married in California, I moved east for Arbitrage Management Company. Mm-hmm. She said, "I'd follow him." I don't know who asked, but her reply was, "I'd follow him anywhere except into politics." Anyway, so I must have been. I was living on Croton-on-Hudson. 52,
okay.
something
okay.
plus
So
or
that's
minus.
the advice.
Yeah, eat right,
mm-hmm.
stay mentally active, stay physically active. I still walk. Turns out I cannot walk uphill briskly anymore without raising my heart rate too. When I can't walk, I have a machine. I have a bicycle at home that I do my cardio on, and so on. So keep mentally active, keep physically active. Right, have something to do.
Right.
Enjoy a laugh. Go to a concert. Have fun.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This has been great. Right. These are some great words of wisdom, and now these are other Nobel Prize winners. I asked them to give me some questions, and these are the questions I got. So Bill Sharp, who we spoke about earlier, he asked you the following question, which he asked me to credit to Marty Leibowitz. So I'm going to do that. He said, "What was your major contribution to financial practice?"
I had a match which lighted a small piece of a forest, and since then the forest fire has spread. My major contribution was primarily my 1952 mean variance analysis, and then Markowitz 1959. People read Markowitz 59, which explained what covariances were, but also had the, more comments about how you get the estimates and so on. So that's my by 1959, I had done everything. I didn't stop writing. But in terms of financial practice, everything which has become standard financial practice, I had written in 59. Still to come, databases, time series, computers, the top-down, Gary Brinson's top-down analysis, and so on. Marty Leibowitz's through the Yield book, and so on and so forth. We tell a little story. Last year or year before, has to do with Marty Leibowitz, Q Group, the quants, my people, mm-hmm. had their 50th anniversary, and they sent a car to me. They picked me up in San Diego and drove me to Phoenix, not Phoenix, the fancy place outside Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona, and I went for 3 reasons. One, these are my people. This is 50th anniversary. I got to go. Secondly, I wanted to show them the work, which, as I said before, I feel is transformable once it gets recognized, but that I'm doing now. So I presented Volume 2, the summary of Volume 2, and I awed them, absolutely awed them. And the third reason was I wanted to show them the old man still had it. So I was in the middle, and I had a large screen to my left, a large screen to my right, and I didn't know whether to look. So I got all the way to the left, these big screens, so you could see them, you could see them next county. And after I got through wowing them, I walked with my little walker all the way to Marty Leibowitz, who was still center. And when I got to him, I said, "Does the old man still have it?" And Marty Leibowitz said, "Old man? What old man? I didn't see any old man."
That is great. So this question came from Myron Schulz.
Yep.
And he said, "What important new contributions, new avenues of research in the investment arena should people be focusing on today?"
Well, let me tell you what my book is about. The traditional investor, of not Black and Scholes, but Samuelson and Maassen and Markowitz, he's only he or she, but he is only interested, is making its entire living from investment, and he's the only stakeholder. But if you take a family with, a father and mother and 4 children and a cat and a dog, they are all stakeholders and they have different time horizons. And chapter 10 of, so speak of portfolio selection as a social choice. But chapter 7 talks about decision support systems and, to a certain extent, implementing what I call the game of life, which doesn't have to do only with portfolio selection. It has with births and deaths and buying houses and getting an education and so on, and how you have to develop rules, not only of portfolio selection, but it's just a kind of move in a game of life. Like if you only knew how to move bishops within chess, you won't understand chess. So the notion, and these rules, humans can't do it. You can't remember, can't execute. So you need a computer. You need some kind of computerized decision support system to actually execute the game of life. That is what I think we should be working on. That's what finance should be in the 22nd century.
Okay, thank you. And I have your book, so I'm going to
be
reading.
so
this is from Gene Fama, though, the last Nobel question. It's sort of a joke, but he said, given your path-breaking early work, did you ever regret not becoming an academic?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, so let me go to some of the questions that might be more related to economics. First of all, actually, before that, as we edge into the field of finance, you've talked to me privately about Fisher Black. So I wanted to, you've given, what are your opinions in general? You had some things you've said to me, and I wanted to know.
I think, I won't try to rank
right
everybody or with their strengths. Although, if there was a vote as to who was the smartest, Bill Sharp, Harry Markowitz, Gene Fama, Bob Merton, Myron Scholes, Fisher Black, I bet on Fisher Black being the winner.
Interesting.
I mean, just in terms of his breadth.
Wow, okay.
I'm sorry, not only his breadth, but his breadth and his depth.
And did you get that, just to follow up on that, because it's such an interesting statement, did you get that from personal interaction or reading his work, or both?
Both,
okay.
both. So, I was in New York, I got a call from Fisher Black. Oh, I sent him a paper on, here's some interaction between me and Fisher Black. I would have loved to have been in on the conversations between Jack Traynor and Fisher Black. I mean, Jack was also one of these way out, and I love, in an academic sort of way, but I love people who come up with new ideas, where I say, why didn't I think of that?
How much has portfolio theory contributed, do you think, to wealth inequality? And then how much inequality and unequal opportunity in society is too much? And then related, is the finance sector too large? Now, by the way, this was not my question, but someone submitted it. And so I just wanted to, I guess it's really a question about inequality and what, if you think it's related to portfolio theory or how you think about that.
Right. Okay, let's talk about inequality. Now you have this primitive tribe living on the banks of a river, and the men hunt, and the women stay back and they take care of the children, and so maybe there's a leader that's called the king, but he gets the same, he gets a throne or something like that. So that has a lot more equality than we have. We have very rich people like Bill Gates, who first made his money and then figured out how to give his money, probably more skillfully than the U.S. government, and then we have people who are homeless by their own choice somehow. They would rather live in out of a push cart than and that's their choice. So the question now is a welfare question. Who's happier? I mean, which would you rather do? Get up in the morning and go hunt, and your wife stays home and takes care of the children, or get up in the morning and be a professor, and you paid your dues to be a professor, and somebody who didn't like college didn't pay their dues. So I think I think that while it is not perfect, and we keep having to ask, is there a better economic system, or is there a better morality? I think the United States, Western civilization, I would prefer to be here. There is a wonderful book by Ron Koss, and I think his name is Ning Wang, about how China became capitalist. And Mao Zedong believed that if he could wipe out every trace of capitalism, he would have a perfect society. And he tried harder and harder, and the place sank further and further into the mud. Afterwards, they started to emulate Western society. There was a little story, a little anecdote in there, where the guy in China who was the Minister of Finance or something like that visited London, and he expected London to be as Marx described. He found out that the garbage man makes 6 times as much as he did. Okay, I am sure that under Mao, the society was more equal, except for Mao. And London is less equal, but I like London. Right now I like China, but I have a lot of Chinese students, but I would hate to be under Mao and get socially retrained.
You're most known for your work on portfolio theory.
Yep.
We know that. What other achievement, maybe pick one or two, would you like to be also known for?
Well, let's see. Let me do 3 or 4.
Okay.
Just rattle them off. I've been working since 1959. I continue working. There's the SimScript simulation programming language, which is used for very large systems. If you look at my book, Exhibit 7.1 quotes somebody who says about how they in the 1980s they built this large-scale essentially logistics model of the U.S. and allies, and this model is still used today either by one person or 200 all over the world to answer questions, and it managed to evolve despite the increase in despite the changes in computer technology and despite the evolution of the mission, because of the it is now got at the heart it's still SimScript. At the outer levels there's interactive this and that, which was not around. Okay, so that same technology I believe could be used for databases, for building decision support systems. So that is the. Let's leave it at that. Of the things I have done, somehow SimScript and its entity attribute set view of the world, and how SimScript implemented it, and how successful it was as a simulation language, it is not widely known because the folks who own it charge a high price for for a few hundred users. And I hope I will be known when we start using those for data support systems, decision support systems.
Many investors right now are worried that the asset prices are too high.
Yeah.
So what's your view on the expected returns of different asset classes or the market in general?
Yeah, I'm still optimistic. Let me tell you why. I went from you remember Harvey, the storm, and Irma, and what's it? I'm momentarily a little worried about the trade wars and something like that, but I've got these short-term capital gains, so I can't. When Harvey struck, No, when Irma struck. And so now it's from Harvey to Irma. I sold all my bonds, every one of them. It took me a while to remember, hey, I got bonds in my retirement account. And so remember, this was at a time when the interest rate was zero. Well, short-term interest rate was zero. And the curve was, they were not making bonds. And I went all in bonds. And I first went 1/3 big cap, 1/3 small cap, and 1/3 emerging markets. So, and then I said, no, what I'm going to do is take the big cap and divide it between 6 companies. This is on the assumption that someday they're going to rebuild Puerto Rico, they're going to rebuild Florida, including the fancy stuff on the West Coast, Tampa, and they're going to rebuild Houston, okay, which they haven't done very much of lately. So I figure in order to rebuild these things, including housing, they're going to need lumber, Weyerhaeuser, they need glass, Corning, they're going to need wallboard gypsum, they're going to need bulldozers to clean so that's Caterpillar. USG is, not USG, United Technology is the air conditioning, the elevators and so on that you need in order to live in I got one more, I think, 3M. Okay. Now, I also put 1/3 in small cap and 1/3 in emerging markets. The Weyerhaeuser thing hasn't worked out yet because there's a shortage of labor to build houses. And everybody's going into debt to become at college and so on. But the small cap, down where I bought it in August, it was quite low. I have, small cap has made great, way up. The emerging market is way up, and and eventually they're going to rebuild Puerto Rico. So eventually that Caterpillar is going to work. So you have to use forward-looking estimates based on your. Now, this was at a time when the market was making highs because the market is making highs because Trump was reducing regulations. Mm-hmm. I had no idea that the taxes would come down, and that is a big, that was a big plus. I also had no idea that he'd start a trade war, which has made things rather bumpy. Mm-hmm. But while the stock market has been very bumpy, the economy is moving along, and eventually the economy has to. So it looks like Trump and maybe the Republicans are going to get swept out because of Trump's nonsense with soybeans, among other things, stupidity. Well, let me tell you first the ABC of trade balances. What you draw a circle and say that's us. What you ship out, what you sell outside that circle, minus what you pay in the circle, what you have, what's the flow of funds, equals your trade balance. Mm-hmm. Okay, now that's an identity. Now, what we owe the world changes with this minus that. Now, that's not a causal relationship. So let me ask you the following question: If A minus B equals C is a arithmetic relationship, suppose you take C, which is your indebtedness to the world, mm-hmm. which includes, for example, German banks buying U.S. bonds. Mm-hmm. And suppose you want a $1.3 trillion budget. What is going to happen to how much you owe the world? It's going to go up, it's going to increase. That's C. Now, by definition, B minus A equals C. Mm-hmm. I don't know how it's going to get that way, but it can't be otherwise. So Trump, in trying to reduce the trade balance, is like a dog chasing its tail. The faster the dog runs, the faster the tail moves. And why do we buy from China? Because they give us the best deal. Okay? Well, there is this business of, intellectual property and so on, so maybe we have to rough him up a little bit, and hopefully he's just playing games. Hopefully he will. But in the meantime, there's some soybean farmers that aren't going to suffer.
Right.
Okay, so what was my?
Okay, that was good. So but I got it. State of equities. The last few questions are the first one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I think the economy is going to continue because look, because of let's think, that need for capital is still there. Mm-hmm. Because of the tax incentive, a lot of capital has been brought from overseas to the United States. Mm-hmm. It's going to be put to work. It's not going to sit in vaults, you know.
Okay.
And you can't consume that much. You're not going to have yachts that much. You got to, So I think, never mind the ups and downs. And I think Trump will either get swept out of office or he will quickly, the soybean farmers are about to vote him out of,
Right, they might be upset.
Yeah, they might be upset. Yes, they might, just because they're living. I mean, suppose you're something that he did took half your salary away.
Right.
You might be upset.
Yes.
Right, definitely.
What do you think represents the biggest problems with trends in our society today?
Look, that has been. You have to read a book called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by McKay. And, he goes over bubbles like the tulip bubble and the South Sea bubble. First 100 pages are fun. Later he gets into witch burning, which is not, which since these are real people, not, it's not fun. And then I understand later it gets to be fun again, but I didn't go beyond the economics thing. So, crowds go mad, like I was talking about political correctness. It is not what you say, but certain words, which will make the political correctness holier than thou people, upset. And it used to be, sexual, he, and there was at IBM Research, we submitted a paper to the people who were organizing a conference in the French Riviera. And of course, our wives were all looking. So it said, this is a sexist paper, must be a sexist language, or programming system, because they use words like workman. Workman. So the lady's an idiot. Mm-hmm. She doesn't know who I am. I don't know who she is, but she's an idiot. And she was able to keep Barbara from going to the French Riviera, which is horrible. And so it has always been, and so it always will be. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't fight it.
Right. Okay, thank you. What 3 pieces of advice would you give young students of finance and economics to be successful in their careers?
Again, it's not an easy question, but I'll tell you the answer. First question, what is your career? What is making you happy? Do you want to be a businessman, a business girl, lady? What are your, do you want to be an academic? What are your preferences and skills that make you qualified? What would make you enjoy? I work at night. Let me tell you my business plan. You can see that I make decent living. But I'm a night person, and I write books at night, and I manage to get here in time to. So my business plan is this: Harry, quite contrary. How does your business grow? I love to toil under the midnight oil, and my clients send me dough. Now that's me. But if somebody is not. I was reading philosophy in high school. I was reading science at a popular level like the ABC of Relativity, but I was reading Hume and Descartes and Plato and Aristotle and so on. That was me. I managed to turn it into a living, So who are you? What do you enjoy? How can you make a living doing what you enjoy? How much money do you really need? I'm not as rich as somebody who invents a product that you can sell. But as long as you got a roof over your head and 3 square and a bed, with me, I need a light so I can read a book. You have to do an operations research analysis on who are you, and what does it take to get to where you want, and do you have the wherewithal?
And what do you say about, there's so many students nowadays that I feel don't want to work enough. They don't know what they want, but they don't want to work enough. They don't want to put in the hours. What do you do about that? I feel that there's a lot of that.
You try to show them one at a time, individually, the consequences of their action, and it's up to them. You cannot make... I read Weierstrass is the guy who... he's a famous mathematician, if you know.
Weierstrass's theorem, also the one.
Yeah.
There's.
Go
ahead. Yeah.
Weierstrass-Bolzano. The Bolzano got it. That says that you can approximate a function by.
The polynomial.
Polynomials subject to certain constraints and so on. But if you, I had my calculus course was from Sanders McLean of Birkhoff and McLean wrote a very famous book. Birkhoff was a very great mathematician. McLean lived to 99 and made great. But he said, he said to the class, you are about to learn the definition of the limit of a sequence. Some of you understand it, and some of you won't. Those who understand it will understand calculus. Those who don't won't. There's I don't know, I want to get too technical, but it's a story that says for every epsilon greater than 0, there exists a place in the sequence such that from then on you are within epsilon of the alleged limit. Okay, whenever I had to hire a mathematician, and if he had a nice personality, I'd say, what is the formal definition of the formal, not the intuitive, but formal. And if he says, well, it's sort of getting closer, I said, don't call us, I won't call you. And if the guy was nice, like there's a Ganlian Shu, who's the mathematician I hired for many, a couple of times. When I moved, I took him along. If somebody like him says, for every epsilon greater, okay, you got the job. Well, somebody must have invented that. God didn't say, I don't remember it in the Bible. I don't remember. Who invented it? Weierstrass. Okay, so when I mentioned Weierstrass, he wanted to be a mathematician. His father wanted him to take up law or something so he could become a petty bureaucrat. He was so torn up by this conflict that he took nothing. He just sat through. He just didn't get any degree, but he read math or attended a course or two. So he was sick the rest of his life. He had, somatic symptoms. So because his father insisted he should do A, and he wanted to please his father, when his soul, his very essence said, you got to do B, he became sick. I don't want to make anybody sick.
So do A. And for you, the last tid, because you're inspiring it, is this.
That's okay. We're done. I don't need
this is
to
hit. But no, we're going now.
Eventually,
This is because you've inspired it in this government. In your life, would you say, if I split up hard work / motivation, pure genius, so naturally given particles, and luck, how would you divide up those three?
Well, let me tell you about luck. Modesty I'm not modest. I tell my class, I don't want to seem vain. I am vain, but I don't want to seem vain. Okay. This business, if you have the gift of solving problems, like, have you ever, Itzhak Perlman?
Yeah.
Have you seen him up close?
Not live. Yeah.
He has a very wicked sense of, has a very funny sense of humor. So he was endowed with a gift of being capable of playing a violin like that. Now, being capable of playing a violin like that is not the same as playing a violin. It takes a lot of hard work. But if you love it, how would, who would I be if I stopped reading? I was reading in high school. At some point, I went from reading Shadow magazine, not comic books, but the magazine and Green Hornet. And when I was about 14, somehow I read The Origin of Species. I don't know what made me, but it was on a shelf. I heard of it. And I was so impressed by the way that Darwin marshals his fact. I decided, well, I don't want to do the Shadow magazine. I'm not interested in that. But I wasn't interested in biology. I was interested in philosophy and astronomy, cosmology, and that shaped my life. So that was me. That was the essence of me. Now look, the only place I applied to was the University of Chicago, because that's where my Uncle Willie went. And the university, and I said, my grades aren't too good because I solved, algebra. There's 20 problems, 19 of which are trivial. And the 20th I solved for the A students. And Mrs. McGrady, my algebra, I remember her saying, Harry, if you only did the homework, I could give you an A because you creamed the test. But because I wasn't about to spend, life was too short. So they said, well, we usually don't take people at your age, at your grade level, but we'll let you take the entrance exam. So not only did I get in, they said the entrance exam was also served to it was a placement. We do these survey courses, and you know as much about the physical sciences as we intend to teach, so you are excused from the physical sciences. Okay, 2 years later, I've got to choose an upper department. I forgot how much I loved the physical sciences, especially astronomy, cosmology. I had a course in economics and the social science survey. I like its combination of empirical and mathematical, so I went into the economics department. Arguably the greatest economics department in the world. Mm-hmm. I somehow, my natural abilities call me to the attention of Charlie Koopmans, who is the head of the Coles Commission, and pretty soon I am in the Coles Commission doing mean variance analysis. Because somebody said of this broker, that's the best advice a broker has ever given. I'm in portfolio theory. I get an offer for 4,000 bucks, which is a livable from Brown University. I go to Ted Schultz, later to become the Secretary of State under Reagan, but then the head of the economics department. They must have known who I was. And I said, I got an offer for 4,000 bucks from Brown University. Should I take it? He says, Harry, don't sell yourself short. And I wait, and I ran corporation, says to Coles, who you got? They said, look at Markowitz. I tell them about, portfolio theory, risk and return on the portfolios. They love it. I go to Rand Corporation. I was there in 1951. I published in 52, but in 51, a couple of economists, 2 or 3 economists, because there's this thing called linear programming. We want to use it. Here's a article by, George Danzig, whoever it is, and I want you to teach our programmer. So I read the article and so on. A year later, George Danzig comes, and I imprint myself to, he becomes, and by that time I'm launched. I've become famous already. Okay. So how much luck is in there?
So is it? It's a bit gift, a lot of hard work.
Yeah. It's a gift, which doesn't make me better or worse for having it, but I'm delighted. I'm delighted to have it. I don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. If you want to be look around you. Think of all the books that are in this place. Mm-hmm. One of the luxury. I always love to go into library stacks. I love to browse library. Well, it turns out I have built a library now that I think of it. I have 4 rooms in this office suite, and every one is lined with books. Books that I haven't read, some of which I have read, but books I would read. And every now and then I say, oh, that's a little book, wonder what it's about. And I pick it off the shelf and I read it in my spare time. And there's other things I have to read because I want to be thoroughly grounded in my profession, which means learning a lot more math than I said to Fisher Black one time, do you know how much math I had to learn because of Black shows? And he says, I don't do that stuff. I just think of CAP-M and with tiny steps. So he had an intuition going back, and he saw it. I have fun. I have fun in my present. But I know lots and lots of awfully nice people. I have met awfully nice people who are interested in doing good for their client as well as themselves by servicing, by dealing with the following question. A doctor may have the life and death of of a patient. We have the life, in terms of the financial life of the future of these people. We know it's random, it's uncertain. We have to show them what the trade-offs are. That's a big contributor. There's a book called Eminent Economists. I never intended to be a great benefit to the world. I was just interested in philosophers. What do we know and how do we know it? Which naturally made a transition to, if I wandered economics, of course I would be interested in economics of uncertainty. I read von Neumann, Morgenstern, and that became my specialty, which turned out to be a way of having fun and making a very good living. I think that's my pleasure.
That was great.
That was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
Welcome. We're at Harry Markowitz's office, and I wanted to show you some interesting things at this office. So first of all, here's his collection of really special books. And what you'll see here is some that I noticed right away. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. Okay, that's right here. Also here in the special collection, we have Darwin, The Origin of Species. Okay, amazing there. And then here we have John Maynard Keynes, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, 1936. And a couple others I'm going to point out. Theory of Relativity, collection of works by Einstein. And then we also have Feynman and von Neumann. Okay? So this is in the special collection here. We also have Archimedes and some other things, all here. Aristotle in the special collection. And you can see, just look at the library, there's a lot of books in this library, right? Just a lot of books. This is Jack Traynor, a book by Jack Traynor. Okay. This is Markowitz's first book, Portfolio Theory. It's not an original copy, but it's a bound copy that was given to him as a gift. This is the original, right there. David Hume, original. Inside here, there it is. That's an original copy. Okay, that's amazing. And this was a gift. This is very expensive. And no, I'm going to keep it here. But this is a gift for him. Okay, so this is Harry Markowitz likes to draw occasionally. This is a drawing he did recently, 2016, and it's of a yacht, whatever you want there. Of course, the famous Ibbotson stuff. And then I found, there's a lot of funny stuff up here, but I found this really cool. I don't know if you can get to it. This is Sharpe Renounces Efficient Market Theory, 1980. These are the notes, typed up notes of Harry Markowitz before Portfolio Theory, the book, came out. And here they are.